In CMC, the one thing they didn't teach us is how to handle technology. So we've been fidgeting around with a number of gadgets, and we're finally here. If you do have a little glitch in between, please pause, take a deep breath, stand up, stretch your hands, and Vikas will get it back on show. Okay, we're going to kick off day one. I'm Johnson Samuel, batch of 83. And it's a great privilege to welcome all of you to our the first day of the academic session. We have a very interesting day ahead, and one of the things we've asked our speakers to do is to not make it very technical, because we're not here to enlarge our knowledge in the science side of things, so to speak, but to tell us about life in general and about how we can, when we read the newspaper or the Daily Mail in the UK, how we interpret things. So the first speaker for today is Vikas Khanduja, and Vikas is from the batch of 1991, and he's going to speak to us on a number of things. Firstly, I'd like to introduce him to the UK after his graduation. He's trained in London, and then he went on to Cambridge, where he's a professor of orthopedic surgery. Not only is he a professor there, he's also the president of the British Hip Society. And I know him in a different way because he does help with the Cambridge the leadership program, which is to train medics in leadership roles, along with the Judd Business School in Cambridge. So he's done a lot of innovations. He's given me a long set of things that he's done, which we'll publish at some point on our site, and we will send it across to you. But his main area of interest is the hip, and he's now the president of the British Hip Society. He's also the Hunterian professor of the Royal College of Surgeons, and that's a great honor to welcome Vikas. Vikas, over to you.
So thank you very much, Johnson, and thank you very much, everybody, for giving me the stage to talk to you here. As it so happens that all of us are extremely well prepared for all our talks. So when the invitation came to me about 3 months ago, I thought I'll give them a call and prepare for this talk appropriately. So about 24 hours before the meeting, I gave Johnson a call. Okay, what am I supposed to do with the audience? What is my remit? And that was exactly the remit. He tells me, by the way, there are no orthopedic surgeons in the audience. I said, yeah, this is good. There's one. Excellent. Two. Okay, brilliant. Excellent, excellent. So that's good, that's good. So he said there are no orthopedic surgeons in the audience. I said, perfect, this is going well, what am I going to talk about? You're not allowed to talk about technology. I said, perfect, this is all I do, so I can't talk about that as well. And so it goes. And you have to entertain them for 30 minutes. That as well. So I said, perfect, this is going to be a perfect talk to entertain you all for the next 30 minutes. So I'll start writing the talk at about midnight and finish at 3 and then email it to him early in the morning. So I hope I do justice to the next 30 minutes and I tell you about, rather than anything technological, just my journey and share a few thoughts with you as well of the trials and tribulations of how we've actually reached here. So bring you greetings from our biomedical campus in Cambridge, a really lovely campus, and would be delighted to host you if you're interested in visiting. These are my disclosures, and some of them are pertinent to this talk. So all good things actually start happening in Vellore, and all good things happen in the Welcome Lab in Vellore, and all good things in Vellore happen with Gagandeep Camp. So I was a medical student, and most people in their third year were taking the bus from the hospital back to the hostel, coming back and relaxing. Whereas the 10:30 bus I was taking from the hospital after having a cup of coffee with David. I don't know how many of you remember David from Men's Hostel. And then going to the hospital to Gagandeep Gang's lab and growing Shigella at about 10:30 or 11 p.m. with Madhesh, a postdoc at that particular point in time. And then we published the first paper on oxidative stress response in gut bacteria as a medical student. And I think research methodology and questioning about why you need to do things actually started there. So I really need to thank you, Gagandeep Cherry, for that, for instilling that discipline, and also that questioning mind. So a big thanks to Cherry and to Vellore, because the journey actually starts there. So what we do in Cambridge is I spend a lot of my time, pretty much most of my time, in treating this condition. This is called femoroacetabular impingement. Now what happens in this condition is that you have an abnormal shape of the femoral head, and every time the patient would flex their hip and rotate it, it places a huge amount of stress on the labrochondral junction up there. And as you can imagine, that repeated contact, that repeated abutting will actually make a tear in the labrochondral junction, and the articular cartilage keeps thinning out in the front of the hip, and then you get arthritis. So this is a very good mechanical model as to how one develops arthritis in the hip joint in the Caucasian population. And we've known about this for a very long time, and we've read about it in our orthopedic textbooks, but Professor Gans from Switzerland first described it in the late 90s. And then the revolution of FAI started, and the whole specialty, or almost a subspecialty of hip preservation actually commenced. And I've been a part of that revolution, really. So when Professor Gans had described it initially, we used to make long incisions of 25 to 30 centimeters to remove that little bit, 5 to 8 millimeters of bone from the front of the femoral head-neck junction, so that that impingement stops. But obviously, things have moved on, and we've come on to the era of arthroscopy, or minimally invasive surgery. And no other procedure in the history of orthopedics has actually grown to that extent. You can see that we've grown by almost about 727% in the last decade. Number of hip arthroscopies being done just in the UK and worldwide. So whatever Professor Gans told us to do in an open technique, we can now do it arthroscopically. That is the labral repair, excision of the cam lesion, or reshaping the bone to make it round enough so that impingement does not happen. And basically the aim is to reduce the amount of contact stresses in front of the hip joint. It's as simple as that. That's what we're trying to do. And then repairing the damage that has already been caused through keyhole surgery. So that's what I spend my life pretty much doing in Cambridge. And because of that, we get lots of visitors from around the world coming to learn this technique in Cambridge. So one of the visitors was Ori from Israel, and that's where this innovation story actually starts. So Ori was a good fellow, a fairly experienced orthopedic surgeon in Israel, and I was discussing this problem with him, and I said, Ori, we really need to get down to how do we actually find out what the contact pressures are in the hip? How do we find out the forces objectively? So Ori goes like a diligent student and thinks about it, and then says, I've got a friend who works in the materials department, and he's looking at some sensors, and he could potentially help us. So one Israeli to another Israeli, and that Israeli is actually working for this lady, who's called Professor Shoini Kanarayan. So one Israeli to another Israeli makes me meet another Indian in Cambridge, sitting in materials lab, which is fantastic, okay? So Shoini calls me, she said, I think this is an interesting problem. Let's discuss over it, and let's have a coffee and some lunch in Clare Hall. So I go up to Clare Hall, lovely surroundings, and we start talking about forces and sensors. So the first rule, or the second rule now, because the first rule, everything is Gagandeep kind. The second rule that I've learned is serendipity, okay? I never knew Ori from Adam, I never knew Shoini from Adam, because they were sitting in Cambridge, and it had to happen. So I met Shoini, and then I started thinking about this. And serendipity, people have written books on it, right? But the bottom line is that if you've got a prepared mind, and you have an unexpected event, you recognize the potential in that event, seize the moment, amplify the effects of it, and evaluate the effects. So there are books written on it. In short term, just believe in God and let it happen. Okay? That's what it means. So just let it flow, right? And anyway, I let it flow. So in the meeting with Shoini, the third thing comes up. The third thing that I've learned is she asked me, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to measure forces in the hip joint? Well, because I want to know how much I need to reduce them by. But why? And she kept on asking why, because that's an engineer, that's how they think, okay? So the why is very important. Why are you doing it? And I think if you go a bit deeper into it, and I'll come to it in a minute, that why has to be linked with a grander purpose. And I think us coming from Vellore, that spiritual purpose needs to be in there. Why are you trying to do this? And I said, I'll come to it in a second. So why are we doing this, or why are we wanting to measure it? Is because the number of joint replacements is increasing, generally both hips and knees. I won't bore you with these data, but the demographic shift is towards the young. So a lot of younger patients are now having the hip and knee replacements. So that means the joint has to last for longer. That means you should really know the forces that are going through that joint, because it has to last for longer. More importantly, after the patients have their joint replacements, because they're young, they want to do a lot more. Classical example is Andy Murray. He still thinks tennis on his hip resurfacing, right? At a very high level. So the amount of forces going through that hip joint are significantly higher. At least in the UK and US, we are facing an epidemic of obesity. So again, the forces going through the hip joint after the joint replacement are done higher. And then the population is surviving for longer. So not only are you actually putting in the joint at a younger age, it has to withstand those forces for a longer period of time. And the technical goals of a total hip replacement that we are trying to achieve are all this: accurate center of rotation, accurate leg lengths, blah, blah, blah. Won't go into the techniques of it. But the bottom line is we do not pay any attention to the forces going through the hip joint, and that's how hip joints fail. So there is a huge unmet clinical need, because we want to actually decrease those forces so that the molecular weight polyethylene that you put in as a spacer in the hip actually lasts for longer. The rates of dissatisfaction, especially in the younger patients, are higher as well, and you want to be reducing those. Revision procedures are more difficult and more expensive. If a primary procedure costs £10,000 in the UK, revision procedures go up to almost as high as £100,000. So economically, it makes sense as well to actually be learning what is going on. So thinking about all these things, there is a paradigm shift in your questions, really, and that's what happened in this process. So from trying to do one labral repair and one arthroscopic intervention on the hip perfectly, your questions change to how do you abolish arthritis? Or how do you decrease the revision rates in joint replacements globally? And when the question changes, that's when your thought process and all your actions change as well. I think this is very important, and I learned this from the Shankar Netralaya chap in India. He was giving a talk, and basically he said that when he was focused on doing an operation on the retina, because he's a vitreoretinal surgeon, on a single patient, then all he could think about was how does he technically become that smart retina surgeon who can actually get that retina right. And when his question changed to how does he abolish blindness in India, then there was a paradigm shift in thought process, and all the actions related to after that are history, because you can see the multiple free eye camps that he started. So the question change, that paradigm shift in question change is very important. And from then on, thanks to Shomini, again, our thought processes basically led to all the actions further on were very different, because we're not talking about one hip now, a personalized hip, we're talking about globally how we actually stop this. So the solution was, this is microfluidics, that is what Shomini is an expert in. We're looking at sensors to guide positioning and tensioning, not only in hip replacements, but technically all joints. And in simple terms, this is what the sensor does. It will basically measure what is happening in the joint. So we've incorporated those sensors on a benchtop model into a hip replacement, and that's what we've done. So that was the proof of concept, that got published, and then the next thing was to protect the patent, so we filed for a patent, and that is in publication now. Then was to integrate the sensors into the implant materials. So whatever we're using standard in orthopedic surgery, we wanted to do that. So we did that, and again published on that. And the most important thing is that up till now these sensors are not being used because The hip joint is a ball and socket joint. They have to be conformable. So there is the ability of these sensors to conform to the joint is the massive plus. So you can get it right in the geometry. So it's in between the two layers of the implant that we actually put in. So this was the initial product. And between Shoni and me, we could actually do this. She had a good lab, I had the idea. I got into the operating theater, got into C operations, and we could keep testing it. But how do you take it to the next stage? And that's where developing your question and your research methodology to the next stage where we could actually get more funding became important. So that is the next thing that I learned, that research methodology, which actually appeals to the funding bodies, is essential. So the next thing that they wanted was data from the cadaveric lab, because they had the benchtop models. So we did the cadaveric lab data, got the product ready, but this is, as you can see, a wired product at this moment. So the next step was obviously to get it in as a wireless product, and that's what we want in the operating theater. So we've done that, we've done the cadaveric studies, just to show you exactly what happens in the hip when we are implanting. I'll skip through this, but essentially that's what we've done. And then this is the next lesson that I learned, that research is all about measurement. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. That's the bottom line. So if you want to improve something, you have to start measuring it. And in this case, it just meant that we were measuring actually pressures in the joint. Now we had to expand, because we had the product, we'd done the benchtop, we'd done the cadaveric experiments, but we didn't have a clue about market research, how's it going to be placed globally, etc. So we needed the tech guys and the market research guys to come in, and the team became very important. And suddenly we got slides in market research, we knew exactly where the product is sitting, we knew exactly what our competitors would be in the market as well, and we had the whole team actually doing that. And suddenly, we had lots of grants coming in and partnership with higher bodies as well, to the tune of almost $500,000 we were able to secure within a very short period of time. And then we were advised that we should incorporate at this stage because the patent had been filed, and so RTOSense was born. So we can do all this only because we've got some funding now, right? You can make all these fancy videos and actually make it a bit more cheesy as well. But the point I'm trying to make is that you really need a good team and you really need support to actually do all this. And then awards like this started happening from Armors and Braziers. Invitations to this meeting started happening. Johnson wanted me to speak at this meeting as well, only after all this. But anyway, the point is you can't do it alone. Okay? And if you think that you can do it alone, you're absolutely wrong. You really need a team. You need to collaborate. And collaboration certainly is the new competition. Again, laboring the point here, if it works, this is the pit stop. 1.82 seconds is all they take to actually change all that and get the car going. You can't do this alone. Okay, so if you need to do big things, you really need teams, you really need collaboration, you really need expertise from other areas as well. So I think the era of doing things alone is the past, for sure. So collaborate, please collaborate, is the mantra. And then there are other applications that we've actually come across based on the team effort because of robotics, because of the way we train our surgeons, virtual reality training, and this is navigated epiarthroscopy, so lots of force sensing applications here as well, to find out the exact amount of pressure that the surgeon is using while he's actually doing the operation. And then virtual reality training, so for training surgeons as well, we could actually be putting in gloves which have got force sensors on it and seeing how they are good at, or bad, or not so good at hip arthroscopy or knee arthroscopy, and actually be looking at their training from that point of view. So lots of applications. Obviously, a long-term ambition is to have implanted sensors in every joint that goes in every hip or every knee or every ankle that goes in, and then that data is input onto a server. So if somebody like Andy Murray is having a hip replacement, when he plays the front hand, we know exactly the amount of force from that hip because it will come into the server. Because data is really the new oil. The more data you have, the better it's going to be. So imagine every joint that goes in, we're capturing that data onto a server. And that would be the aim of this whole project. So we've gone about it sort of in a hard way. The journey has been about 4 years or so. But the NHS now, if you want to innovate in the NHS, there are better programs available. You've got the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program. All of us have ideas, I'm sure. And if you really want to develop and expand, then these two programs, the NHS Innovation Accelerator and the Clinical Entrepreneur, are out there for you to apply. And it's getting bigger and better. This is Professor Tony Young from ARU who's actually started this. So that's definitely a good oath to go by. And the final thing is, what's going to be, you're going to ask me, okay, so where is this going next? The answer is, I don't know. I've just relied on the serendipity process and I'm working hard. And to be honest, I'm enjoying the journey. I'm meeting smart people, I'm having great conversations, I'm coming to meetings like this and talking to you guys. The journey is brilliant. And I'm not really bothered too much about the end. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, I've still had a great time. So believe in the process and believe in the journey for any junior alumni out there, and don't worry about the end because you'll definitely find a bucket spot at the end for sure. All of us have one. And on that note, it's been a pleasure being here this morning. I hope I've done justice and made it not too technical. Thank you very much for the invitation. Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Vikas. As I was sitting here, I was really thanking God that you're 10 years junior to me. Because in a few years' time, when my hips go, I know where to go. Okay, so thank you very much for that very clear and interesting talk. We're keeping the time, so for every talk, we will allow 2 questions. And we have a coffee session after this. So during the coffee session, you can catch Vikas and James Drive, who's going to be our next speaker, and grill them with whatever you want. You've got half an hour to 45 minutes at coffee time. One bit of housekeeping. The housekeeping simply is that at the coffee time, those of you who are interested in doing the trips this afternoon, if you haven't already registered, could you go to the front desk? and register for the trips. Okay, so I'm going to take two questions, one from this side and one from the other side. So any questions from here for Vikas? If you don't ask, then the other side is going to get more questions.
That was a very fascinating talk. I'm interested about a concept that Paul Brand introduced many, many years ago. That is, in women in India who squat, the incidence of osteoarthritis involving the hips is significantly lower. Is there something that you can do to influence the posture and physical activity of a younger age group that would prevent coming to this step?
I think that's a very relevant question and a fantastic question. So we've been looking about this on this, and the reason why it happens in Caucasians more than the Eastern population is because of the higher incidence of football and rugby in the initial stages. So what we've seen is that the CAM develops, this CAM morphology develops between the ages of 11 to 14 when the growth plate is loaded in a certain fashion. And that's classical CAM, primary CAM development. So we're doing some work with the junior clubs now to see if we can reduce the amount of loading that they have per week, because most of them are actually coming to the hip replacements in their 30s. And you're right, you don't see this in India, or hip impingement is not seen in India. And for that matter, if you go a bit far east, it's the other spectrum. You see a lot of dysplasia, you don't see impingement. So it is definitely to do with loading patterns. It is definitely to do with loading patterns on the growth plate. And we are trying to help that by a proof of concept study on 3 clubs, taking the course into action before it goes as a national program. Yeah.
Any questions from that side?
The sensors, are they incorporated into the polyethylene, or is it a separate layer between the metallic shell and the polyethylene?
Yeah, again, great question. So what we've done at the moment is we are only looking at the trial sensors when you're doing your hip replacement, and they're incorporated within the trial sensor. And both our benchtop models and our cadaveric lab models actually show that you're getting good data as long as you calibrate them. So we haven't reached the stage where we are leaving it in the polyethylene, because that would change the characteristics of the polyethylene. So at this moment in time, we are only using the sensors as a trial liner to guide surgeons to a better positioning and neutral forces when they're doing the trial implantation. That's what we do.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's absolutely inspiring. Thank you, Vikas.